Hello and welcome to Pulsecast, the podcast exploring the key trends in media technology. Today we will talk about AI cost and pricing models with Damon Neale, who is a CEO at Metadat-AI. Thanks, Damon, for being again with us.
Thanks for having me again.
So this is one of the episodes of a series of episodes we are doing on AI with Damon. We did a few ones on legal issues with AI, and we've done one on the investment landscape as well. And we're now focusing on another economic aspect of AI, which is pricing models and cost models. So as usual, let's start from the general. And I want to ask you first, Damon, what are the main costs that are driving AI pricing at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Lorenzo. There's so many different factors at the moment. And I think one of the leading ones that people are hearing about in the news is the cost of graphics cards. So, for example, like the NVIDIA A100 is about $10,000 at the moment it is targeted at AI kind of inference and training. If you compare that to like a top end CPU, they're about £1,000, and a lot of other IT functions work just fine on CPU, but a combination of the gaming market and largely actually AI has really driven the prices up because they just can't produce them fast enough. There's such a backlog for these kind of cards. And when companies are buying them as well, they're buying them in such mass. So, for example, we've got companies like OpenAI and even governments like in the EU, for example, building $20 billion gigafactories, absolutely filling them with mostly NVIDIA graphics cards. So the cost of that is huge, and you don't need one to train these big kind of large language models. You need hundreds, thousands of them. So I think that's a first kind of big one. But also there's just not that many people that really understand AI at the moment. So but hiring the salaries of these kind of people are anything from kind of 120K up to 300, maybe even more, depending on the skill set and the specialization. So, maybe on the higher end for people that know how to train like natural language understanding and large language models. And they're all being picked up by these big US companies like OpenAI again. So it's very difficult for anyone to hire them. And then, I think also like just to add on to the graphics card one, the cost of like powering those, they're very power hungry. And then also the cooling required for the heat they generate, all of the productization of everything around it. You've got all of the same stuff that you would build in a normal SaaS product, in addition to all of the AI kind of R&D going on. So you think of prices of kind of normal SaaS tools today being, maybe $10, $20 a month, or however they charge like transactionally. You've got that on top of the cost of running the AI models as well. So I think all of those things, for example, drive the pricing up.
Thanks, Damon. If you had to compare the pricing, the cost models, of AI compared to traditional software industry, but even SaaS, what are the main differences or new things that people should take into account, or is it similar?
Yeah, it's actually quite similar in a lot of ways. I think SaaS typically will charge like on a per user basis. So, for example, for a storage account or just any kind of service, it might be like $20 a month per user kind of thing. And we have that very like exact pricing with ChatGPT being about $20 a month in the West for an account. And to keep that kind of pricing down, there are usage limits. It might also be using like the more basic models. But companies like OpenAI claim it costs them, 100,000 a day plus to kind of run these models, and they're selling it at those kind of prices. So that's very comparable. But I think where it differs is there's a lot more transactional based costs.
Yeah.
So there are still like API as a service kind of based pricing that we have today. So for example, if you want to buy news information, you can pay. It might be like a cent per 100 articles or something get returned from an API. And with AI, it might be $1 to, in some cases, I've seen $10, $17, $25 per hour of content being processed. So it can be very transactional. I think something that is particularly unique about AI, kind of AI SaaS or like AI services compared to just general SaaS, is more kind of success-based pricing. Now, that's less common, but I am seeing it, for example, with Zendesk and Salesforce, where they might charge you $1 or $2 for every kind of chat conversation that is resolved purely automatically without actually going to a human. But then if it's not resolved successfully and has to go to a human, you don't get charged. So I think that's quite unique compared to SaaS. But otherwise, I think in most cases, it is fairly similar, but perhaps more transactional. And I think that's just the nature of how expensive it is, as saying before with the graphics cards, to run those. So the more content you want to process, the more kind of compute power they need to have and use. So then you're paying per kind of minute processed or frame processed or hour of content processed in that case.
Thanks, Damon. And you mentioned success-based models. So can you perhaps tell us what are the most common pricing models at the moment for AI? I know there are a lot of them, and sometimes there's some confusion about them. So it's good to have a kind of if you could group them in the main categories.
Yes, definitely. There is so much confusion at the moment because everyone's trying to charge differently, and it's often based on you having a really good understanding of how much content you've got to process. So I'd say the top ones are kind of usage-based pricing, which that's that transactional example I was mentioning, where it's paying per frame or per second or per minute or per hour of content that you have to process. So it might be 1 cent per image or $10 per hour of content going in. To complicate that even further, I feel it's meant to simplify it, but you have pre-purchase credits. So it might be that you sign up for $20 a month and you get 10,000 credits for that, or maybe you just buy bulk packages of credits. So I'll spend £100, that will give me 100,000 credits, but then that gets consumed differently depending on the model you're using, depending on the media you're processing. Maybe it's cheaper to process an image, more expensive to process video, or it's really cheap to do OCR, but really expensive to do kind of scene descriptions. And it just draws down on the credits differently, which can be quite confusing, I found, with clients to follow. There are a few cases where they charge per storage, like per gigabyte or per terabyte. So some will give you kind of like unlimited free AI included, but you just pay more for the amount of data you have stored in the MAM system or with that storage vendor. Also said about the user-based pricing, so like ChatGPT is a really common one, or Google Gemini and Claude and these kind of LLMs doing it on the basis of like $20 a month per user. But with that, again, you're using their most basic model. It's still incredible, but their most basic model, and there are kind of usage limits. Like some of them allow you to generate images as well, but it might be limited to 3 a day, 5 a day, 10 a day, depending on them. And again, it might be credit based depending on the complexity of the thing you're asking it to do. And then I think finally, the other kind of method is like virtual machine hiring, like in the cloud. So it's not as simple as this, it's far more complicated than this, but just to really simplify it, if you were to get like an open source model and it just simply worked by just putting it on a GPU machine in the cloud, then you can pay the hourly rate for that machine. But to put it into perspective, if you want to put one of these reasonably large parameter models, so let's say, I know 100 billion parameters for a kind of ChatGPT alternative, that would have to go on an A100 kind of card in AWS, and that would be like $45 an hour with kind of current pricing. So, but then you're not paying the transactional fees. So they're the kind of categories, at least, for how AI is kind of being charged by vendors onto businesses at the moment.
And that kind of usage-based pricing is also very common because for managing that infrastructure part of the cost you're talking about.
It is because it's if you're thinking, let's say you are running one of those models, a big a visual model or a large language model. If you're paying in a lot of cases that kind of $45 an hour to have that machine running, well, how are you going to charge that? Like, how much content are people going to process with you? It's very difficult to know, and you can't just go around to people and say, fine, you're going to pay the $45 for the machine. Plus, I've got, let's double that, for example, because I've had to build the product around it. I've had to have all the support staff. Obviously, there's like sales overhead, management overhead, everything that it takes to run a business. And maybe it's kind of 3 times that cost for you to even just make like a 20-30% profit. In which case, you're now looking like $150 an hour for that machine running. and it starts getting, that's where it's like, this doesn't make sense price wise. And I think that's why right now a lot of the models are quite expensive to run. I'm seeing some of the best ones in the industry. Just to be respectful of the companies, I won't necessarily name them, but one of them, for example, considered to be the best, is about $17 an hour to process. So 1 hour of media that you have is going to cost $17. So I think, yeah, hopefully that answers your question in part at least.
Yeah. No, it does. And I think when it comes to pricing, now we're seeing, of course, a lot of competition. So what I'm seeing, I'm telling you what I'm seeing, and maybe you can tell me your opinion as well. But some sort of polarization. So as you said, the basic models are becoming more like a commodity. So they've always been kind of free to access. So there's maybe a cap on usage, but everyone can access them. And then the more sophisticated model, or the more sophisticated tools, gradually are becoming more niche, also in terms of more expensive and more premium, as we've seen, for example, with OpenAI deep research capability. So there's some kind of polarization. At the same time, there's been this kind of DeepSeek effect of open source technology entering the equation as well. So I don't want to put too much stuff in there, but what are the, I'm aware I kind of did, but what are the main trends in pricing you're seeing at the moment? And can you tell us maybe also your outlook when it comes to pricing? Do you see this polarization continuing, or how do you see pricing evolving in the next few years? Because it's difficult to predict.
Yeah, no, great question. Because I think I think ChatGPT almost set this precedent that you've got to charge this $20 a month, because I can't believe that they're making a huge amount of money off of that, considering the cost of hosting and running these models, again, building all the product on top of it. All of the R&D efforts are hugely expensive. I didn't mention before actually, but even just collecting all of the data, storing the data to use to train the models is incredibly expensive. And they've got some of the brightest minds there, which I'm sure on really good salaries. So it's all just so expensive. So to offer it to consumers for $20 a month, I think that might be a kind of sell it cheap thing to get market penetration and market share. So I feel like all the other ones like Gemini and Claude and that have had to kind of match there. But you're totally right that then I think what they're trying to do to make some more money on top is, if you want to integrate with other tools and services, and if you want the more advanced models that are maybe, a few hallucinations for an individual might not matter, but if you're going to fully automate a process in business, the accuracy might be important in like how they're handling a customer query, or how it's processing a video file. The outcome might matter more in a business context. So then when you're having to pay via the API on that transactional basis that I was saying, for that more premium model, for the fact that you can automate it through an API, I think that is definitely a factor that's there. I think the pricing is going to come down. It's still quite high for a lot of my competitors, at least at the moment still. And I think that's just kind of reflective of the amount of work. So while the open AIs might have billions, literally 10 billion plus of investment to build all of this, there might be some economy of scale. While a lot of these other niche vendors, especially in our industry, trying to do some really cool stuff with video, it is incredibly niche and incredibly expensive. And that's why we've got, $17 an hour for like high-end video processing, video and like analysis. And then, even $25 an hour for kind of sports video processing, 'cause you've got the live factor to come into there. But I'd like to think that as graphics cards kind of evolve, processing power improves, that those prices will come down. And I think, like governments have mentioned before, like the $20 billion gigafactory for, as it's being called in the EU, UK is building these kind of factories. I think their goal is to make sure that if you want to compete with the open AIs and you don't have 10 billion spare, then you can just kind of rent that resource from the government effectively, from this pool. They've pulled their resources together to build these huge processing factories. So I'd like to think when they're complete, it will also bring down the costs. You also mentioned about that open source side of things. So I think I feel that the pricing did kind of want to naturally go up, and then you get models were released by Meta, some good open source models from them, as well as like DeepSeek. Now, when that came out, that took, I think, 17% off the value of Nvidia overnight,
Yeah.
about $600 million. So it's absolutely profound impact on the market, because there's this perception that you need a lot of very expensive GPUs to train models. Now, I've managed to get away with it, but unfortunately, I'm not as big as DeepSeek, so I can't have such an impact on the market. But they've done it in such a big way where they've produced a model that is comparable to ChatGPT and giving it away for free effectively. Now, I think Facebook and the makers behind DeepSeek did it in order to try and erode some of that profit, or the potential for kind of profit for companies like OpenAI. And I think especially since Microsoft invested in it. So there's this whole kind of political battle almost going on around us that is involving, you know, billions, tens of billions. And I think it's a bit of a war to try and prevent maybe ChatGPT from getting too big, or Microsoft from taking over in this space. So I think that open source play is a little bit more to prevent them from getting too big. And the good thing for consumers and businesses, it means that the prices can't go up too high, because while it can be very expensive to deploy, productize, host, support these open source models, it's not going to be the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars you might spend on these professional models. So they're going to have to keep their kind of cost ceiling, their price ceiling down, and keep everything more cost effective. So I think that kind of trend is probably going to continue. I do have a few more predictions, but just to keep it brief, that as these things evolve, the pricing will come down, but I don't think it can come down too much, because there is that cost of everything around running the business and the product, as well as hosting these big models. Even if graphics cards half in price, I still don't think the cost of the transactional nature of paying for it will come down by half. So it's still going to be reasonably pricey, but ultimately cheaper than a human to do tasks to a similar standard.
Thanks, Damon. Because people also talk about the kind of Uber effect. So Uber companies like Uber started cheap, then hike prices once they gain market dominance. So do you think they'll keep the prices will keep getting lower? Just to clarify.
Yeah, so no, it's a really great point. So I think there's going to be, with the transactional nature, I'd like to think the prices will come down, but then there is that whole thing of this $20 a month that I said probably is too low just to get that market share. Is it exactly as you say going to be that Uber model of I think everyone remembers when Uber first came out, super cheap to get anywhere, didn't make sense to even own a car in some cases because it was that cheap. And then once they'd kind of knocked to one side the taxi industry and became like the go-to option, then ramped all the prices up. So I think they might even be one of the biggest kind of loss-making companies for a long time that is worth billions, valued at billions. And we've seen it in other industries, in other cases as well. I think YouTube was losing hundreds of millions, and then they added advertising onto it to solve it. Whereas I think with Uber, it was hiking the prices up. So I can totally see that happening in this industry, because if you think about it, $20 a month for a consumer to have access to something to help you with a bit of research and summarize some things and just check your work, that is really good value for consumer. And there's millions of consumers, so maybe a million consumers paying $20 a month. That's a good amount of revenue that you're going to get. But then for businesses who might have a few thousand of users per, for the like larger corporates, or a few hundred for smaller companies of users, it's $20 a month for, like, especially to deal with bespoke use cases like reviewing legal documents or processing video to broadcast standards. That kind of doesn't make sense. So I can really see, if you go, that person might be $3,000 a month or $5,000 a month for their salary. Well, why not charge $1,000 a month for the chat GPT that is your research person? So it's costing a business $12,000 a year, maybe, instead of like $36,000 to $50,000 a year for that individual. And then you actually have AI workers. But then you get into job displacement and all that. But I think for commercial licenses, I can see that being the way where businesses pay for maybe 1,000 or tens or hundreds or 1,000 members of AI staff at perhaps a few hundred or $1,000 a month, instead of having people fill those roles. So I do think it could go in that direction.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because basically you're describing a situation, a future in which there's even more polarization between consumer and business, which is kind of the opposite of what we're seeing in other sectors, in other areas. So, in other areas, we're seeing a kind of convergence between B2C and B2B. And in this case, I think there is a bit of a divergence between going on because consumers got used to paying nothing or paying very little for accessing AI chatbots. So it's very interesting you're saying that. Okay, and another question I wanted to ask you, coming back to the cost models, is on infrastructure. You talked about the cost of infrastructure, and we know from the data that particularly big companies, big tech companies, are spending a lot of money on infrastructure. And you mentioned governments as well, because it's become, as we said in other episodes, a geopolitical issue, AI as well. Is this sustainable, this kind of race for building more data centers and spending more on AI infrastructure, or will it kind of come to an end at a certain point, because it's growing very significantly? So I know this is related to the pricing and to the consumer's propensity to pay, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, it's another good question, and very difficult one to answer, because I think if we've got smarter people than me who have clearly gone and done the math and said that spending $20 billion building a factory on AI in Europe, and billions of dollars to do the same in the UK, and tens of billions in the US, and I think, is it Tencent? It might be Tencent in China. I think it's like 52 billion they're investing. So they clearly are putting it's not just kind of talk. They are spending significant sums of money, hundreds of billions going into building all of this. So based on that, I would say that it's not going to end, at least in the next kind of 3 to 5 years, because the life cycle of IT kit is normally written off in kind of a 3 to 5 year lifespan. So at least the next 3 to 5 years, I'd say this is the trend that everyone has predicted. They're putting all their money behind it, and this is how it's going to go. But then you do have examples like what I'm doing with AI, where I do use GPUs, but I've managed to get it working on machines that are like 50 cents an hour rather than $45 an hour, and performing very comparably. And that just brings the cost down, because in broadcast, at least, price is an important factor, just as much as kind of accuracy and quality. So I do think that with the release of these kind of open source models for free, with vendors like myself trying to bring the price down to make it actually feasible in a business workflow. Because for me, if it's 10 euros, $10 an hour and above, kind of may as well hire a person. Why would you use AI to automate it? That kind of doesn't make sense. So I'm aiming for the kind of like $1 to $4 an hour equivalent. So I think with these kind of models coming out, it's going to try to reverse the trend, but I just don't see how that's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, given the investment. And also, if you consider, while DeepSeek did have such a profound impact on Nvidia's stock price, it's bounced back. So there are these things coming to try and stop that trend, but they're having a significant short-term impact. But at least in that 3 to 5 year span, it's not. It's still very much in favor of invest in these huge data centers with lots of graphics cards, lots of electricity, lots of aircon, to cool it all. So that I think, next 3 to 5 years is that's the trend for sure.
Thanks, Damon. So let's talk about next 3 to 5 years. Well, I know it's difficult to make predictions, but you said earlier that you had some predictions about AI pricing. You already shared some of them. What would be the main predictions? Where do you see pricing going? And maybe you can talk about we can come back to pricing models as well when it comes to the predictions.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the kind of transactional nature, I think the prices have to come down. So as I said, if it's some of the competitors I'm competing with are like 10, 17, 9 kind of dollars an hour for every hour of media you want to process, which is just too expensive. I don't see why anyone doing
this
the
is
math
in
on
media.
that
Sorry, this is
specifically in the media industry. But this I'm talking about like video processing. So I guess it does kind of go outside, but if we assume the media industry has the most content, but there's lots of media, like video examples in other industries like legal and like oil and gas and other spaces, and advertising and everything else. But I think though we're going to see that, as you say, that polarization. So maybe consumers, it will remain maybe around the $20 a month mark as they take advantage of the efficiencies with graphics cards and costs coming down over time as the supply and demand kind of balances out a bit more. And as these factories are completed as well, should bring the costs down. But then businesses going, do you know what? The value that we're adding to your business is we are saving you from hiring an extra person. And therefore, we'll take a percentage of that. So kind of like that success fee, but just let's replace a head on your team. And this is very similar to kind of, you go back to the Industrial Revolution time of, you spend thousands of pounds on a loom and it replaces a person, needed to kind of knit and sew and things like that. So I think that's going to happen. That's going to diverge. So it might be on the licensing side if you want to use it for commercial purposes, or a model that is less prone to hallucinations where it's important. I think we go into other industries as well. I think the prices could go up in like legal and medical because the cost of those people are so high, that skill level, the accuracy level, and the liabilities and risk of those models making mistakes are so high that they would need additional cost to kind of justify the risk they're taking on the insurance and the extra R&D to get that extra few percentage of accuracy out. So yeah, I think it could just become more diverged where you've got consumers doing it incredibly cheaply, but there's a lot of them, and then businesses that just potentially the price is shifting. If it is still transactional, hopefully the price is coming down. But when it is, no, this will replace a job function, the price actually being reflective of a small salary as an equivalent.
Thanks, Damon. You also talked about different elements going into the kind of cost equation. Some of the elements are, technology infrastructure based, but there's also talent, huge salaries being paid to these AI experts. Are all of these important? I guess so. Is there one of these that will become more important in the future, or it's just the combination of them that is the most important thing?
I think at the moment it's the combination, but I'd like to think that as we progress, there's going to be more people with these skills coming out. So instead of it being so rare to have expertise in AI, it being, we're now seeing degrees in it. Whereas when I started in it in kind of 2015, 2016, there weren't any degrees really that I could find in AI or even training courses. There was very little known about it. It was only people that were doing it that kind of knew about it. So I think now that there's degrees, we're going to get the next wave of people coming out. People are getting more familiar with how to write effective prompts. So the just general skill pool is going to increase. And again, that whole supply and demand thing, if there's much more supply, I'd like to think the prices for the jobs, the salaries will come down, which will then hopefully bring the prices down for businesses to consume the AI models. That said, though, will we get to the point where AI is just kind of not necessarily a commodity, but training an AI model is kind of super easy. So you don't need the experts as much. It could even be that we have AI that can train AI more effectively. So I do that for some of my training to increase accuracy of results. So I will have AI prepare the data for more effective AI training, or even transfer learning as well. There's these other techniques that, new techniques might emerge that then mean, do we need all these experts, or is it just something that you just kind of throw a bunch of data in, tag it a little bit, give it some kind of parameters or directions, and then it just off it goes, and you don't need these teams, which would be really interesting. So I guess then the AI models will develop at a much faster rate, but then also scary in terms of jobs. If it's not creating the new jobs for the jobs it's kind of taking, where does that go? Electricity really should come down in price and aircon and stuff, but I think the trend has been that's just going up as well. So yeah, maybe all of the efficiencies we get with graphics cards, and we've got different types of kind of graphics processors and stuff that are available. We might see some more bespoke kind of graphics cards. There's like ASICs and FPGAs which are used for like very specific applications. We might see some more of that. So trying to think, Tesla, for example, they have trained one that is all it can do is self-driving car, but it's much cheaper than an NVIDIA card. much more lower powered, much more suitable for that edge device. In a car, you've not got infinite power, so much more suited to self-driving, but probably awful at processing video for broadcast purposes. So we might see some more kind of niche specific applications and specific hardware to come out, and that might impact pricing as well. But yeah, I think it's all the kind of things I've said before. I think they're still relevant now and will continue to be relevant at least for 3, 5, maybe 7 years.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to predict. I mean, there are so many variables and things to consider, which is why, I find it so fun talking about it with you. I think it's a great topic, but yeah, aware of time as well. So thanks for being with us today, Damon. Always good to talk to you.
Thanks again for having me.